I expected that there would be, years of sort of active backlash to this. And the way I envisioned it, I thought I would be, hopscotching around like county courthouses in various red states as local officials were, standing in doorways, or, people were barricading gay couples from going in and getting licenses. In the end, there was one, that woman, Kim Davis in Kentucky, who went to jail. But the fact that we all know her name is a sign of how small that resistance was. But my anticipation, and that was from overlearning, I think, reading too much about Brown v. Board or Roe v. Wade, which each instigated provoked a backlash in different forms. So I think a few reasons for this. One, and this was true in states that legalized marriage, and then when the federal government struck down state bans and effectively imposed this, is the implement for you have this landmark court decision, or these landmark court decisions in states that dramatically extend a new set of rights to a category of people who'd been excluded, and everybody recognizes the momentousness of them. But the implementation of this was like shockingly easy everywhere, which is like, there's a court order, and guess what? County clerks now have to sometimes rewrite the words on a form, on a one-page form that says, so instead of saying husband and wife, or it says partner one, partner two, or like spouse / whatever. And somewhere at the registrar of public records, somebody has to create a new spreadsheet on a form to measure, a new line on a spreadsheet to measure different types of couplings. But like, this is really easy. The Supreme Court ruled in 1954 that public schools had to be desegregated, and we're now 70 years later, and we don't know actually how to desegregate neighborhood public schools. And a lot of the backlash was to Brown and to affirmative action decisions and to a whole bunch of things that the court has ruled on, came from the fact that people's lives were disrupted when this court order came down, and that the local politics of figuring out how to actually do this on the ground is really tough. And this was really easy, and nobody's other than the people who are now able to marry and their family and their children, but the opposition didn't see their lives affected in any way. That's a huge difference. A few other small things, one, opponents recognized before the Obergefell decision in 2015 that they had lost. And that was not necessarily the case. And so if you remember that day in June 2015, it was momentous and major news, but I don't think you were shocked, because you had been conditioned through media coverage to expect this as the outcome. And the court had been sending signals through the cases that they did not take over the previous year, the appeals they did not take, that this is how they would end up. And so during that time, opponents of same-sex marriage pivoted to two different areas. One, they went to sort of, trans issues or issues related to gender identity, where public opinion was much more favorable to them. And so a lot of the kind of political infrastructure and capital and money that had been fighting gay marriage now has been, for the last 5 or 6 years, fighting, these bathroom bills or the girls' sports issues. And then the other thing is they pivoted quickly to sort of the religious liberty, religious freedom exemptions, which, so you've had a couple of cases go to the Supreme Court that are in their way about marriage. You had the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which was the baker in Colorado who didn't want to bake a custom cake to celebrate the wedding of two men. He said it violated his biblical values. And then there was the case from Philadelphia, the Fulton case, which was a Catholic social service agency with a contract with the city of Philadelphia that did not want to place children with same-sex foster families. And these are obviously both related to marriage, but what is really important, and we're going to see, this is the beginning, I think, of a very long arc of conservatives testing how far the court will carve out religious exemptions related to kind of issues of sex and gender, but it's important to see how different this is, which is like, this is fundamentally a loser's game. It is saying we have given up trying to change the laws to reflect biblical values, which was the sort of message of religious conservatism for 30, 40 years. There's a reason that Jerry Falwell called his group the moral majority. The argument was this is a majority Christian or Judeo-Christian country, and the laws should reflect biblical values. Now, the argument is, you hear from religious conservatives, you could be home if you turned off this live stream and turned on Fox right now, you wouldn't have to wait more than 5 minutes to hear somebody say, we Christians are the besieged minority in this country. We're under siege from the courts and big tech and academia and Hollywood and whatever, woke capital, whatever that is. And we need the protection of the courts because we're a minority that cannot get our way through the political process. And so they just sort of turned. And then the other big part of it is Donald Trump announced his candidacy for president 11 days before the Supreme Court decision in the June of 2015. The two things we'll see in history books that happened that month that are momentous. And if you had told me in advance that the sort of most talented demagogue of modern American history would announce his candidacy for president the same month that we have a sort of sweeping civil rights ruling from the Supreme Court that struck down the laws of red states and whatever, I would have assumed that those things would have been related in some potentially explosive ways. And the fact is that for all of his instinct and gift for pitting people against one another on identity lines, he's not terribly judgmental about who you have sex with and who you're married to. And some part of the story of this is that if Donald Trump had decided to make his campaign during the primaries and the general election about ringleading conservative reaction to the Supreme Court decision, people like, Ted Cruz and would have followed, and I think that we would have spent a lot more of that election year focusing on the Supreme Court decision, but he didn't. He wanted to pick on immigrants and Muslims and Mexicans and whatever, and so it kind of just disappeared as an issue.